The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my mother-in-law, Nancy, standing on the doorstep with a stern expression. Before I could greet her, she barged in, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "Louise, we need to talk," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "Clark deserves better than you. I've come to take care of my son. Pack your things and leave. You're nothing but a burden." I stood there, stunned, as she thrust a stack of papers into my hands. Divorce papers, already filled out and signed by Clark. The man I had loved and supported for over 30 years had betrayed me in the cruelest way. "He doesn't need you anymore," Nancy sneered. "You've been holding him back for far too long. It's time for you to go." My heart pounded in my chest as I flipped through the pages, the words blurring together. How could Clark do this to me? After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made for his dreams, this was how he repaid me. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. "I won't sign these." Nancy laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You don't have a choice, dear. Clark has made his decision, and you know how persuasive I can be." I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when Clark and I had been so full of hope and ambition. We were going to conquer the world together, two young writers chasing their dreams. "We can conquer anything together, Clark," I had said, my eyes shining with love and determination. "You and me against the world." But somewhere along the way, things had gone terribly wrong. Clark's dreams of becoming a successful novelist had crumbled, and he had grown bitter and resentful. And Nancy, with her manipulative ways, had only fueled the fire, whispering poisonous words into his ear. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise within me like a tidal wave. How dare they treat me like this, after everything I had sacrificed? I was no burden, no obstacle to be cast aside. I was a strong, independent woman who had worked tirelessly to support my husband's dreams, even as they slipped through his fingers. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "This is my home, and I'm not going to let you bully me out of it." Nancy's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face, but then her expression hardened, and she shook her head. "You'll regret this, Louise," she hissed. "Mark my words, you'll regret the day you defied me." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving me standing there with the divorce papers clutched in my trembling hands. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was just the beginning. I could feel it in my bones. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight for my life, for my dignity, and for the respect I deserved. No more would I be the meek, submissive wife, cowering in the face of Nancy's wrath. It was time for me to reclaim my power, to stand tall and proud, and to show them all that I was not a burden, but a force to be reckoned with. I tossed and turned that night, unable to sleep, as memories of the past flooded my mind. I thought back to the early days of my marriage to Clark, when we were young and full of dreams, our love burning bright like a beacon in the night. It was at a writer's workshop that we first met, both of us aspiring novelists with stars in our eyes. Clark was tall and handsome, with a mop of unruly hair and a smile that could light up a room. I was immediately drawn to his passion for storytelling and his unwavering determination to make it as a writer. "We're going to conquer the world, Louise," he had said to me one night as we sat by the fireplace, our fingers intertwined. "You and me against the world." I had believed him then, with every fiber of my being. We were a team, partners in life, and in our shared pursuit of literary greatness. Nothing could stand in our way. But as the years passed, the harsh realities of the publishing world began to take their toll. Clark's manuscripts were rejected time and time again, and his dreams of becoming a celebrated novelist slowly crumbled before our eyes. I watched helplessly as the light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a bitterness and resentment that I couldn't understand. It was during those dark times that Nancy, my mother-in-law, wormed her way into our lives. At first, she seemed like a supportive presence, offering words of encouragement and a shoulder to lean on. But soon her true colors began to show. "Clark deserves better than this," she would say, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's too talented to be held back by a wife who can't support him properly." Her words cut like knives, and I found myself questioning my own worth. Hadn't I been there for Clark every step of the way, working tirelessly to support us financially while he pursued his dreams? Hadn't I been his biggest cheerleader, his unwavering source of strength? But Nancy's manipulation knew no bounds. She would whisper poisonous words into Clark's ear, convincing him that I was the reason for his failures, that I was holding him back from achieving greatness. And Clark, blinded by his own disappointments and Nancy's twisted lies, began to believe her. The man I had once loved with every fiber of my being became a stranger to me, a bitter, resentful shell of his former self. The dreams we had once shared were now nothing more than ashes, scattered to the wind by the toxic influence of his mother. As I lay awake that night, tears streaming down my face, I realized that the Clark I had fallen in love with was gone, lost to the darkness that had consumed him. And in that moment, I knew that I had to find the strength to let him go, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me by the very people who were supposed to love and support me. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to fight for my freedom, to break free from the chains of manipulation and betrayal that had bound me for far too long. I would rise from the ashes of my broken dreams and forge a new path, one that was mine and mine alone. And as the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I felt a newfound sense of resolve wash over me. The battle had just begun, but I was ready to face it head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever realized. A few weeks after Nancy's explosive visit, I found myself reluctantly attending a family gathering at Clark's sister Evelyn's house. Despite the turmoil brewing between us, I still held out a glimmer of hope that things could be resolved, that Clark would come to his senses and realize the toxic influence his mother had over him. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I was met with a barrage of icy glares and whispered insults. It was clear that Nancy had already poisoned the well, turning the entire family against me. "Well, if it isn't the lazy burden herself," Evelyn sneered as she approached me, her lips curled into a sneer. "I can't believe you had the audacity to show up here." I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Don't even try to defend yourself, Louise. We all know the truth. Clark has been supporting you for years while you sit around doing nothing. You're a parasite, leeching off his hard work and talent." Her words stung like a slap to the face, and I felt the familiar sting of tears welling up in my eyes. How could they be so blind to the truth? How could they not see the countless hours I had spent working, the sacrifices I had made to support Clark's dreams? But as I looked around the room, I realized that it didn't matter. They had already made up their minds, poisoned by Nancy's lies and manipulation. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a burden, a weight holding Clark back from achieving his true potential. "You're wrong," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I've been by Clark's side every step of the way, supporting him and believing in him when no one else did." Evelyn let out a derisive laugh, and the rest of the family joined in, their laughter echoing through the room like a cruel mockery. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're delusional if you think you've been anything but a hindrance to Clark's success." I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Nancy standing behind me, her face twisted into a smug grin. "You see, Louise?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "No one in this family wants you here. You're nothing but a burden, a weight dragging Clark down. It's time for you to leave and let him flourish without your constant interference." The room fell silent, and all eyes were on me, waiting for my reaction. I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me, suffocating me with its intensity. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I was done being the meek, submissive wife, cowering in the face of their cruelty and manipulation. I was done being their punching bag, their convenient scapegoat for all of Clark's failures. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not the burden here. You are." Nancy's eyes widened in shock, and the rest of the family fell into a stunned silence. "You're the ones who have been holding Clark back all these years," I continued, my confidence growing with every word. "With your constant criticism, your manipulation, and your refusal to see him for the talented writer he is." I turned to face Clark, who was standing in the corner of the room, his eyes downcast and his shoulders slumped in defeat. "And you," I said, my voice laced with a mixture of sadness and anger. "You've let them control you, let them dictate your life and your dreams. You've become a shell of the man I fell in love with, and it breaks my heart to see it." With that, I turned on my heel and headed for the door, my head held high and my heart filled with a newfound sense of determination. I was done being a victim, done being a pawn in their twisted game of manipulation and control. From that moment on, I vowed to reclaim my life, to break free from the chains that had bound me for far too long. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight that had been holding me down for years. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope flickering within me. I was no longer a burden, but a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had found her strength and her voice. And as I walked away from that toxic family gathering, I knew that my journey towards freedom had only just begun. After the disastrous family gathering, I knew I couldn't stay in that toxic environment any longer. The constant belittling, the manipulation, the complete lack of respect for me and my contributions, it was all too much to bear. I had to get out, for my own sanity and self-preservation. So, in the weeks that followed, I began making secret plans to leave. I scoured apartment listings, searching for a place of my own, a sanctuary where I could finally breathe without the weight of Clark's family bearing down on me. And when I found the perfect little one-bedroom apartment, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, I knew it was meant to be. With each box I packed, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. Every item I carefully wrapped and stowed away was a step closer to reclaiming my life, to breaking free from the chains that had bound me for far too long. I will leave Clark and reclaim my life, I whispered to myself as I taped up another box, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. It wasn't an easy decision, of course. After years of marriage, of shared dreams and memories, the thought of walking away was almost unbearable. But I knew deep down that it was the only way I could truly find happiness and peace. As the moving day approached, I found myself growing more and more resolute in my decision. The thought of finally being free from the constant criticism, the manipulation, and the toxic environment that had become my reality was like a beacon of hope, guiding me forward. And when the day finally came, when the last box was loaded into the moving truck and I took one final look at the house that had once been my home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted, and I could finally breathe again. The drive to my new apartment was a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts swirling through my mind. But as I stepped through the door of my new sanctuary, a sense of peace washed over me. This was my fresh start, my chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me for far too long. In the days and weeks that followed, I threw myself into making my new space a home. I unpacked my belongings, arranging them with care and precision, creating a cozy oasis that was all my own. And as I settled into my new routine, free from the constant judgment and criticism of Clark's family, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were moments when I found myself missing the familiarity of my old life, the comfort of having Clark by my side. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by a sense of determination and resolve. I will not let them break me, I would tell myself, my voice growing stronger with each passing day. I am in control of my own destiny, and I will not let their toxicity poison my life any longer. And as I dove back into my work, finding solace in the written word and the stories I crafted, I felt a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. I was no longer just a supporting character in someone else's story. I was the author of my own life, the master of my own fate. With each word I wrote, each page I filled, I felt myself growing stronger, more resilient, more determined than ever to make the most of this second chance at happiness. And as I looked out the window at the world beyond, I knew that the road ahead would be long and winding, but I was ready to face it head on, armed with the knowledge that I was finally free. Just when I thought I had finally found some semblance of peace in my new life, the storm clouds rolled in once again. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was sitting at my desk, lost in the rhythm of my writing, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Nancy, her face twisted into a sneer, her eyes burning with contempt. Well, if it isn't the ungrateful burden herself, she spat, pushing her way past me and into my apartment. I stood there, stunned, as she surveyed my modest living space with a look of disdain. "So, this is what you've chosen over your own family?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "A pathetic little hovel, fit for a pauper." I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Save your excuses, Louise. I'm not here to listen to your lies and self-pity." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers, thrusting them into my hands. "These are the divorce papers," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Clark has finally come to his senses and realized that you're nothing but a burden, a weight holding him back from achieving his true potential. I felt my heart sink as I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. There it was, in black and white. The end of my marriage, the final nail in the coffin of a once-cherished dream. "He doesn't need you anymore, Louise," Nancy continued, her voice laced with triumph. "He has me now, and I'll make sure he gets the support and guidance he needs to become the success he was always meant to be." I looked up at her, my eyes burning with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're delusional," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Clark is a grown man, capable of making his own decisions. This has nothing to do with his success or his writing. This is about you and your twisted need for control." Nancy's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. But then she regained her composure, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Believe what you want, Louise," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But the fact remains that you've been nothing but a burden to this family, a leech sucking the life out of Clark's dreams and ambitions." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "Clark needs someone who can support him, someone who can nurture his talents and help him achieve the greatness he deserves. And that someone is me, not you." With that, she turned on her heel and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final blow. "Sign those papers, Louise," she said, her voice low and menacing, "and leave this family for good. You've overstayed your welcome long enough." And then, just like that, she was gone, leaving me standing there in the middle of my apartment, clutching the divorce papers in my trembling hands. For a moment I felt the familiar sting of tears welling up in my eyes, the weight of Nancy's words pressing down on me like a physical force. But then something inside me shifted, a fire igniting in the depths of my soul. I would not let her win. I would not let her break me, not after everything I had been through, not after all the strength and resilience I had cultivated over the years. With a newfound sense of determination, I strode over to my desk and grabbed a pen. Without hesitation, I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the divorce papers, severing the final ties that bound me to Clark and his toxic family. As I slid the papers back into the envelope, a weight lifted from my shoulders, a burden that I had been carrying for far too long. I was free, truly free, and nothing, not Nancy, not Clark, not anyone, could take that away from me. I took a deep breath, letting the sense of liberation wash over me like a cool, refreshing wave. This was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. A chapter where I would be the author of my own story, the master of my own destiny. And as I turned back to my writing, my fingers dancing across the keyboard with renewed vigor, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head on, armed with the knowledge that I was strong, resilient, and capable of reclaiming the life that was rightfully mine. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt a profound sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. No longer did I have to endure the constant criticism and manipulation of Nancy and Clark's family. I was free to live my life on my own terms, without the burden of their toxic influence weighing me down. Living without constant judgment and criticism feels liberating, I confided in my friend Maggie over coffee one afternoon. She had been a rock for me throughout this entire ordeal, offering a sympathetic ear and a shoulder to lean on when I needed it most. Maggie nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've been through so much, Louise. It's time for you to focus on yourself and your own happiness." And that's exactly what I did. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the written word and the stories I crafted. My little apartment became a sanctuary, a haven where I could escape the turmoil of the outside world and lose myself in the worlds I created. But even as I embraced this newfound sense of peace and contentment, a part of me couldn't help but wonder about Clark and his family. Had they truly moved on, or were they still mired in the same toxic patterns that had driven me away? The answer came sooner than I expected, in the form of a desperate phone call from Clark himself. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was curled up on my couch, a mug of tea in hand and a manuscript open on my lap. The shrill ring of the phone startled me, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something, call it morbid curiosity or a lingering sense of attachment, compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice guarded. "Louise," came Clark's voice, strained and tinged with desperation. "I need to talk to you. It's important." I felt a familiar knot of apprehension form in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed it aside. I was no longer the meek, submissive wife he had once known. I was a woman reborn, stronger and more resilient than ever before. "What is it, Clark?" I asked, my tone even and measured. "It's the family," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything's falling apart without you here. Nancy's become completely unhinged, and Edna's health is deteriorating rapidly. We're drowning in debt, and Evelyn's barely keeping it together with her own struggles." I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. This was the price they had to pay for their toxic behavior, for the years of manipulation and disrespect they had heaped upon me. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I asked, my voice laced with a hint of steel. "I need you to come back, Louise," Clark pleaded. "You were the glue that held this family together. Without you, we're falling apart at the seams." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "You've got to be kidding me, Clark. After everything your family put me through, after the way they treated me like a burden, like a parasite to be cast aside, you expect me to come running back and save the day?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought the call had been disconnected. But then Clark's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Please, Louise, I'm begging you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I need your help to fix it." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as a wave of emotions washed over me. Part of me wanted to hang up the phone, to sever the last remaining tie to that toxic family and move on with my life. But another part of me, the part that still harbored a lingering affection for the man I had once loved, couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. "I'm sorry, Clark," I said finally, my voice firm and resolute, "but I can't go back to that life. I've worked too hard to reclaim my independence, my sense of self-worth. I won't let your family drag me back into that abyss of manipulation and disrespect." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought Clark had hung up, but then his voice came through, laced with a mixture of resignation and defeat. "I understand," he said, his words heavy with emotion. "I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." And with that, the call ended, leaving me sitting there in the silence of my apartment, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within me. As I set the phone down, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. I had stood my ground, but refused to be drawn back into the toxic web of Clark's family. But more than that, I felt a profound sense of empowerment, a knowledge that I had reclaimed my life and my dignity, and that no one, not Clark, not Nancy, not anyone, could take that away from me. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as I turned my attention back to my writing, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with endless possibilities and the freedom to forge my own path, unencumbered by the weight of the past. I thought that after my firm refusal to return to Clark's toxic family, I would finally be able to move on with my life, free from the drama and manipulation that had plagued me for so long. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was curled up on my couch, a mug of tea in hand and a book open on my lap, when there was a frantic knocking at my door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as a familiar sense of dread washed over me. Steeling myself, I rose from the couch and made my way to the door, peering through the peephole. And there he was, Clark, his face haggard and his eyes rimmed with dark circles, a mere shadow of the man I had once loved. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Louise," he said, his voice trembling with desperation, "I need to talk to you. Please." I crossed my arms over my chest, regarding him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "What is it, Clark? I thought I made myself clear the last time we spoke." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his eyes pleading with me. "It's the family, Louise. Everything's falling apart without you here." I felt a twinge of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. This was the price they had to pay for their toxic behavior, for the years of manipulation and disrespect they had heaped upon me. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I asked, my voice laced with a hint of steel. Clark took a step closer, his eyes brimming with desperation. "I need you to come back, Louise. You were the glue that held this family together. Without you, we're falling apart at the seams." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "You've got to be kidding me, Clark. After everything your family put me through, after the way they treated me like a burden, like a parasite to be cast aside, you expect me to come running back and save the day?" He flinched as if I had struck him, but he pressed on, his voice thick with emotion. I know I made a terrible mistake, Louise. I let my mother's manipulation blind me to the truth, to the fact that you were the one who kept us all together. But now, everything's crumbling around me. Nancy's become completely unhinged, Edna's health is deteriorating rapidly, and Evelyn can barely keep it together with her own struggles. We're drowning in debt, and I don't know what to do. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of resolve. I had worked too hard to reclaim my independence, my sense of self-worth, to let them drag me back into that abyss of toxicity and manipulation. I'm sorry, Clark, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. But I can't go back to that life. I've fought too hard to break free from the chains of your family's manipulation and disrespect. I won't let them drag me back into that darkness. Clark's shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought he might crumple to the ground. But then he straightened, his eyes meeting mine with a newfound sense of determination. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I don't blame you. I've made too many mistakes, too many poor choices, to ever expect your forgiveness. But know this, Louise, you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will forever regret the day I let you slip through my fingers. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. And as I watched him go, I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. I had faced the demons of my past, the ghosts of the life I had left behind, and I had emerged victorious. I had stood my ground, refused to be drawn back into the toxic web of Clark's family, and in doing so I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as I closed the door behind me, shutting out the world and all its drama, I felt a sense of peace settle over me like a warm embrace. This was my life now, a life of my own making, a life where I was the author of my own story, the master of my own destiny. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew that I had the strength and resilience to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was a survivor, a warrior, and a force to be reckoned with. After my final confrontation with Clark, I thought I had finally put the past behind me. I had broken free from the toxic chains of his family's manipulation and disrespect, and I was determined to forge ahead on my own path, unburdened by the weight of their drama and dysfunction. But as the weeks and months passed, I couldn't help but wonder about the fate of Clark and his family. Had they managed to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, or were they still mired in the same toxic patterns that had driven me away? It was a question that gnawed at me, a lingering curiosity that I couldn't quite shake. And then one day, I got my answer in the most unexpected of ways. I was out running errands when I bumped into one of my neighbors, a friendly woman named Sarah who lived a few doors down from me. "Louise," she exclaimed, her eyes widening in surprise. "I was just about to come and find you." I raised an eyebrow, suddenly wary. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether or not to share the information she had. Finally, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's about your ex-husband's family," she said, her eyes darting around as if afraid of being overheard. "They've moved into that rundown apartment complex on the other side of town." I felt my heart skip a beat, a mixture of emotions swirling within me. Part of me was relieved to finally have some closure, to know that I had made the right decision in leaving that toxic environment behind. But another part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness, a lingering sense of attachment to the life I had once known. "And?" I prompted, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. Sarah shook her head, her expression one of pity. "It's not pretty, Louise. They've become a cautionary tale in the neighborhood, fighting and bickering every day. The police have been called out there more times than I can count." I nodded, taking in the information with a sense of grim satisfaction. It seemed that my decision to leave had been the right one after all, and that Clark's family was finally reaping the consequences of their toxic behavior. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah," I said, forcing a smile onto my face. "I appreciate you keeping me in the loop." As I walked away, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication, a confirmation that I had made the right choice in breaking free from the chains of Clark's family's manipulation and disrespect. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness, a lingering sense of attachment to the life I had once known. But as the days and weeks passed, that sadness slowly faded, replaced by a sense of contentment and peace. I had escaped the turmoil and toxicity of Clark's family, and I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, unburdened by the weight of their drama and dysfunction. And as I sat at my desk, my fingers dancing across the keyboard as I poured my heart and soul into my writing, I knew that I had made the right choice. I was no longer a victim, a pawn in someone else's twisted game of manipulation and control. I was a survivor, a warrior, and a force to be reckoned with. And as I looked out the window at the world beyond, I felt a sense of hope and possibility wash over me. The future was mine for the taking, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength and resilience to overcome any obstacle that stood in my way.